Hi, friends. Welcome back. Tonight, we dive into the story. Just relax and close your eyes. Beneath the blazing sun of North Africa, where the Mediterranean meets the desert winds, a city once rose like a jewel upon the sea. It began with Phoenician sailors, merchants who sought fortune beyond their homeland. Among them was a woman of legend, Elissa, known to later generations as Dido. Betrayed in her homeland of Tyre, she fled with loyal companions, carrying with her the gods, the language, and the ambitions of her people. When her ships touched the shores of Tunisia, she chose a hill overlooking the coast and declared that here a new city would rise. They called it Carthage, the new city, Carthage. In its infancy, Carthage was small, but its people were bound by the sea. They were merchants, masters of navigation, able to read the stars and harness the winds. Their ships carried fine textiles, rare dyes of deep purple, and cedarwood across the sea. In return, they brought home silver from Spain, ivory from Africa, tin from the distant isles of Britain. Slowly, a trading post became a city, and a city became a power. The years passed, and Carthage grew bold. Stone walls rose high above the shoreline, towers gleamed in the sun, and great harbors were carved into the coast, one for commerce and one, hidden and circular, for war. Within its docks, warships rested like predators ready to strike. Each trireme and quinquereme represented the lifeblood of a city whose strength came not from its fields alone, but from the sea lanes it ruled. Yet Carthage was not merely a city of sailors and warriors. Its land stretched inland, fertile and rich. Carthaginian farmers pioneered new techniques, irrigation canals, rotating crops, grafting fruit trees, feeding their city, and exporting food to distant markets. In villas scattered across the countryside, landowners pressed olives into oil and harvested grain in abundance. Prosperity flowed back to the city, and with it came artisans, philosophers, and priests. At the center of Carthage's spiritual life stood the great temple of Baal Hammon and Tanit. Offerings of incense and fine goods filled its altars as citizens sought divine favor for their voyages and harvests. To foreign eyes, their worship seemed strange, even frightening, for whispers told of sacrifices made to the gods in times of dire need. Whether myth or truth, it cemented Carthage's reputation as a city both magnificent and mysterious. As centuries turned, Carthage became more than a city. It was the heart of an empire that stretched across the seas. Colonies dotted the coasts of North Africa, Sardinia, Corsica, and Spain. Its merchants became so rich that even Greek rivals marveled at their influence. But with wealth came envy, and with power came enemies. To the north and east, Greek city-states watched with suspicion. To the west, tribes and kingdoms resented Carthage's dominance. And in the rising hills of Italy, a new city with boundless ambition began to grow, Rome. Two destinies were now on a collision course. At first, the encounters between Rome and Carthage were distant, more cautious than hostile. Rome was still a young republic, its influence limited to the Italian peninsula. Carthage, on the other hand, reigned supreme over the sea, its fleets unrivaled and its coffers full. Treaties were made, dividing spheres of influence. Rome would dominate the land, Carthage the waves. For a time, peace held. But Sicily was the key. Lying between Italy and Africa, it was the richest island of the Mediterranean. To control Sicily was to control the grain that fed armies, the ports that anchored fleets, and the markets that bound east to west. Both Rome and Carthage coveted it, and when a dispute broke out in the city of Messana, it pulled the two powers into direct conflict. Thus began the First Punic War. For over 2 decades, Rome and Carthage clashed, often at sea. Carthage, long the master of naval combat, seemed unassailable. Yet Rome, with characteristic determination, learned from defeat. They captured a Carthaginian warship, studied its design, and built hundreds of their own. In battle after battle, the Romans adapted, devising the corvus, a boarding device that turned sea battles into infantry fights, Rome's greatest strength. Slowly, the tide turned. After 23 exhausting years, Carthage surrendered Sicily. For the first time, the great trading empire had lost a jewel of the sea. Its people bore heavy taxes, and its prestige suffered. But Carthage was resilient. Across the waters in Spain, it found new opportunity. There, rich silver mines glittered, fertile fields spread wide, and restless tribes offered soldiers for hire. From Spain, Carthage rebuilt its fortunes, and from Spain would rise a family whose name became a curse to Rome, the Barcas. Hamilcar Barca, a seasoned general, had fought the Romans to the end in Sicily. Defeated but unbroken, he led Carthage's recovery in Spain. His son, Hannibal, grew up watching his father fight, listening to tales of Roman treachery and Roman ambition. According to legend, as a child, Hannibal was brought to an altar and sworn to eternal enmity against Rome. Whether true or not, history would prove the oath unshakable. When Hamilcar died, Hannibal inherited command in Spain. Brilliant, fearless, and charismatic, he inspired loyalty in soldiers of many nations: Spaniards, Numidians, Africans, and Gauls. With this army, he prepared for the struggle that would define Carthage's destiny. Rome soon grew wary of Carthage's power in Spain and demanded Hannibal's retreat. He refused. Instead, in 218 BC, he launched one of the most daring campaigns in history. With war elephants, cavalry, and tens of thousands of men, Hannibal crossed rivers, mountains, and finally, the frozen Alps, braving storms and ambushes. Against all odds, he emerged into Italy. There, for more than a decade, he brought Rome to the brink of ruin. The arrival of Hannibal in Italy stunned the ancient world. No one believed an army could cross the Alps. Yet there he stood, with his war elephants and hardened troops, ready to strike at the heart of Rome. In the winter of 218 BC, he clashed with Roman forces at the river Trebia. Hannibal lured the legions into icy waters, then unleashed cavalry and hidden ambushers. The Roman army was annihilated, and the young general's legend began to spread. The following year, Rome sent another force to block him near Lake Trasimene. Hannibal again outmaneuvered them. Under a morning fog, his men ambushed the marching legions along the lakeshore. It was a massacre, the largest ambush in history to that point. Thousands of Romans were cut down, their commander killed, their survivors fleeing in panic. Rome trembled, but the greatest blow came at Cannae in 216 BC. Facing a force nearly twice his size, Hannibal arranged his army in a crescent, placing his weaker troops in the center and his strongest on the flanks. As the Romans advanced, the crescent bent backward, drawing them in. Then, with perfect timing, Hannibal's cavalry and elite infantry struck from the sides and behind, encircling the Roman army completely. In a single day, as many as 70,000 Romans were killed or captured. Cannae became a word synonymous with destruction. After Cannae, many of Rome's allies in Italy deserted, believing the republic finished. Cities opened their gates to Hannibal, and kings abroad watched with interest. Carthage itself, however, did not send the reinforcements he desperately needed. Hannibal remained in Italy for over a decade, undefeated in battle, but unable to strike at Rome's heart. The city refused to surrender, showing the same iron will that had carried it through earlier wars. Meanwhile, Rome adapted. Instead of meeting Hannibal head-on, they avoided pitched battles. They wore down his army, cut off his supplies, and attacked Carthage's holdings abroad. Under the leadership of Scipio, later called Africanus, Roman armies marched into Spain, seizing the silver mines and driving out Carthage's generals. By 204 B.C., Rome carried the war to Africa itself. Scipio landed near Carthage, forcing Hannibal to abandon Italy after 16 long years. The two greatest generals of the age finally faced one another at Zama in 202 B.C. There, Scipio turned Hannibal's own tactics against him. The Carthaginian elephants were driven off, and the Roman cavalry crushed his flanks. Hannibal was defeated at last. Carthage sued for peace. The terms were brutal. The city lost its fleet, its overseas empire, and its right to wage war without Roman approval. It was allowed to live, but only as a shadow of its former self. And yet, Carthage did not die. Though broken by defeat, Carthage refused to fade into obscurity. Deprived of empire and navy, it turned inward, focusing on the land that surrounded it. The fertile plains of North Africa became its salvation. Carthaginian farmers transformed the soil into a breadbasket of the Mediterranean. Grain, olives, figs, and wine poured into markets, and wealth returned to the city. In time, Carthage became so prosperous that Roman merchants themselves grew jealous of its revival. Its harbors bustled once more, though no warships rested there, only merchant vessels heavy with goods. Craftsmen thrived, producing fine pottery, glassware, and intricate jewelry. Philosophers and traders mingled in the agora, while the temples of Baal Hammon and Tanit still received offerings from citizens who remembered their gods had carried them through centuries of hardship. Yet in Rome, suspicion never faded. Senators whispered that Carthage, though disarmed, was rising again, richer than ever. To men like Cato the Elder, prosperity itself was a threat. After every speech in the Senate, he ended with the same refrain, Carthago delenda est, Carthage must be destroyed. His words became a drumbeat, pounding into the Roman conscience. The spark came in 149 B.C. Rome accused Carthage of breaking its treaty by defending itself against Numidian raids. Though Carthage had acted only in desperation, Rome seized its chance. Legions marched once more across the sea. Thus began the Third Punic War. The Romans demanded the impossible, that Carthage abandon its city and move inland, leaving the coast forever. To the Carthaginians, this was unthinkable. Their entire identity was tied to the sea, their harbors, their gods, their ancestors' graves. The people refused, and so the siege began. For 3 years, Carthage withstood the might of Rome. Its citizens, men, women, even children, took up arms. They reforged weapons from household metal, stitched sails into armor, and turned their streets into battlegrounds. Hunger gnawed at them, but their defiance burned brighter. Hannibal's spirit lived in their courage, but Rome's legions were relentless. In 146 B.C., under Scipio Aemilianus, they broke through the walls. What followed was slaughter. House by house, the city was taken, fires spreading through its streets. the temple of Eshmun, the proud harbors, the palaces, all consumed by flame. For 6 days the Romans fought against desperate defenders. On the 7th, Carthage was no more. 50,000 survivors were sold into slavery. The city was left in ruins, its memory cursed by the victors. Yet time has a way of reclaiming what was lost. Rome itself would later build upon the ashes of Carthage, turning it into one of its greatest provinces. And centuries later, historians and archaeologists would unearth the stones, coins, and mosaics that told of its brilliance. Carthage, the city of traders and warriors, lived for 800 years. It rose from exile, ruled the seas, challenged Rome, and perished in fire. But its story did not end with its fall. Even in ruin, Carthage endures as a symbol of resilience, ambition, and the eternal struggle between empire and freedom. The silence that followed Carthage's destruction was not the silence of forgetting, but the silence of remembrance. For generations, Romans walked among the ruins, pointing to the blackened stones as proof of what happens when a rival dares to challenge their republic. Mothers told children of Hannibal as a monster who once marched on their gates, while generals studied his tactics with grudging respect. Carthage, even in death, haunted Rome. And yet, the memory of its greatness could not be erased. Merchants still recalled the vast networks of trade that Carthage once commanded, stretching from the Pillars of Hercules to the sands of the Sahara. Farmers in Africa remembered the Punic techniques that made barren soil bloom, methods so advanced that even Roman agronomists copied them. In ways Rome never admitted, Carthage lived on in the very structure of its empire. Centuries passed. Roman Carthage flourished as a provincial capital, its streets lined with baths, theaters, and markets. The harbors once built by the Punic engineers now launched Roman ships, carrying grain that fed the empire. But under the stones of this Roman city, the spirit of the old Carthage lingered. In local festivals, in whispered prayers, in fragments of language, the identity of the Phoenician founders endured like an ember under ash. When Christianity spread, Carthage became one of its strongholds. Thinkers like Tertullian and Augustine of Hippo preached from its soil, shaping the faith of millions for centuries to come. The city that Rome once tried to erase became instead a center of spiritual power, its voice echoing across the Mediterranean in a new form. But nothing lasts forever. Vandals crossed the sea and made Carthage their capital. A century later, the Byzantines reclaimed it, restoring churches and walls. And then, in the 7th century, Arab armies came. Carthage, battered by centuries of conquest, finally slipped from the world stage. Tunis rose in its place, and the memory of Punic greatness faded into legend. Yet even now, the ruins endure. The broken stones that overlook the sea, the shattered remnants of the great harbors, the mosaics that once decorated wealthy villas, they all speak of a civilization that refused to be forgotten. Carthage survives not in empire, but in legacy. It survives in the lessons of ambition, in the brilliance of its trade, and in the courage of its people who stood against Rome until their last breath. Carthage was not merely destroyed. It was transformed into memory, and memory is stronger than fire. The Mediterranean is filled with the ruins of ancient worlds, stones that once carried empires, pillars that once touched the sky. Among them, few speak with the voice of tragedy and triumph as powerfully as Carthage. Born from exiles, it rose into wealth. It challenged Rome itself, and though it fell in flames, its spirit carried through the ages. To walk among its ruins today is to hear echoes of sails on the horizon, the clash of steel at Cannae, the voices of merchants bargaining in a dozen tongues, the whispered prayers of mothers who entrusted their hopes to the gods. Carthage was never only a city, it was a symbol of human ambition, the hunger to trade, to expand, to endure against the odds. Rome destroyed Carthage, but Rome could not silence it. Its knowledge lived on in Roman farming, in naval design, in military strategy. Its story lived on in Hannibal, whose genius has outlasted even the empire that defeated him, and its ruins still stand on the shores of Tunisia. Reminders that civilizations may fall, but their memory is eternal. 800 years of glory compressed into stone and silence. A lost civilization, yet never truly gone. Carthage is a warning of how power can rise and fall, but also a testament to human resilience, the ability to rebuild, to adapt, to live on in ways its enemies never imagined. Carthage endures in every telling of its story, not only as Rome's rival, but as a civilization that shaped the very sea it sailed upon. And so, when the sun sets over the ruins and the sea turns gold, one truth becomes clear. Carthage may have been lost, but its legacy was never destroyed.